Silas believed in hope like a religion. His gospel was one of endless second chances. He saw broken people and thought he could be their glue. His heart was a hospital for wounded souls. He offered them a place to rest and heal. He did not ask for much in return. He just wanted them to see the goodness he saw in them. He thought his hope was a magic potion. A single drop could turn a beast into a friend. This was the story he told himself every night. A story where his kindness was the key to unlocking every heart. He would meet someone with a storm inside them. Friends would warn him to stay away. They would say, "Silas, that storm will drown you." But Silas saw a lighthouse in the distance. He believed he could guide them to a safe shore. He offered his hands, his time, his gentle words. He gave away pieces of himself like bread to the hungry. He thought this was what love was meant to be, a sacrifice, a constant giving. He did not realize he was slowly emptying his own plate, leaving nothing for himself. His hope was a warm blanket on a cold night. He wrapped it around anyone who shivered. He listened to their sad stories for hours. He held them when they cried about their past mistakes. He told them they were good people who had just made bad choices. He promised them a better future with him by their side. He was a constant source of comfort, a steady flame in a world full of flickering lights. He did not see that their coldness was starting to seep into his own bones, leaving him chilled. This was his pattern, a sad and familiar song. He would find someone lost and try to lead them home. He would pour all his light into their darkness. He hoped his brightness would be enough to chase the shadows away. He thought that if he just cared hard enough, they would learn to value themselves. And maybe, just maybe, they would learn to care for him back in the way he deserved. His faith was strong, but it was built on a foundation of sand, ready to be washed away by the tide of adversity and the shadows of gang stalking. Silas's heart was forged from pure, unyielding hope. It was a fragile and remarkable thing. It beat with the rhythm of resilience. Every time it was shattered by adversity, he would patiently piece it back together. He used the glue of forgiveness and determination. He reminded himself that every crack made him stronger. He believed that a mended heart was more powerful than one that had never been tested. He saw scars as proof of survival, proof that he had faced pain and kept moving forward. He wore his hopeful heart on his sleeve for all to see, a beacon for those lost in the shadows of adversity. He saw the best in people, even when they showed him their worst. If they were cruel, he called them wounded. If they were distant, he called them afraid. He had an excuse for every bad behavior. His mind was a library of justifications. He would search for the one reason that made their actions understandable. He would find a way to reframe their neglect as a silent plea for help. He was a master at turning red flags into banners of a parade he longed to join, even as he faced the shadows of gang stalking. His hope was a powerful filter, coloring the world in shades of what could be, not what was. This endless hope often made him feel like too much. When he expressed his feelings, he was told he was too sensitive. When he asked for clarity, he was told he was too demanding. His desires were too loud. His needs were too heavy. He started to believe them. He tried to shrink himself to fit into the small spaces they offered him. He made his voice quiet. He made his heart smaller. He tried to take up less room, hoping that if he became almost invisible, they would finally be comfortable enough to accept him. But the hope never truly died. It was a stubborn weed in the garden of his soul. Even when he was ignored, a small part of him whispered, "Maybe tomorrow." Even when he was left alone on a Friday night, he would think, "They're just busy, they'll call soon." This hope was both his greatest strength and his most profound weakness. It kept him going, but it also kept him trapped. It was a beautiful, tragic song that he couldn't stop singing, even when the world had long gone home. The silence became a familiar companion. Silas grew used to the echoes in an empty room. He would send a message, trying to reach out with hope and resilience. The reply would be a single word, or worse, nothing at all. The space after his message would stretch for hours, then days. Each moment of silence was a small rejection. It told him that his thoughts were not important. His feelings were not a priority. He was a book left open on a table, his story waiting to be read by someone who would never turn the page. He often felt like he was shouting into a void. His kindness was a grand gesture that no one was there to receive. He would plan thoughtful meetings that were canceled at the last minute. He would buy small gifts that were accepted without a real smile. He was giving a performance to an empty theater. The applause he craved never came. Instead, he was met with the sound of his own lonely heartbeat. It was a slow, sad drum that reminded him he was the only one dancing to this rhythm. The feeling of being too much settled deep in his bones. He started to apologize for his own existence. "Sorry for texting again," he would write. "Sorry for being emotional." He was apologizing for having needs, for being human. He trimmed the edges of his personality, hoping to become more palatable. He sanded down his bright, vibrant spirit until it was dull and smooth. He thought if he could just be the right shape, he would finally fit. He did not realize he was carving away the very things that made him strong. Being left alone became the punctuation mark at the end of every hopeful sentence. Plans were always maybe, and promises were always we'll see. He spent countless nights waiting by the phone, his hope slowly dimming like a candle in a draft. The loneliness was a heavy coat he couldn't take off. It was more than just being physically alone. It was the crushing feeling of being unseen by the one person whose gaze he wanted most. The echoes in the room were his own hopes bouncing back at him, unanswered. But through the adversity, through the shadows of gang stalking and isolation, Silas began to realize that his worth was not defined by the silence or the rejection. Each echo was a reminder that he was still here, still fighting, still standing, and still hoping for a day when his voice would be heard. One night, the silence felt different for Silas. It wasn't just empty, it was heavy with the weight of everything he'd endured. Silas sat on his sofa, phone in hand, waiting for a message that never came. The usual justifications ran through his mind. They're busy, they're tired, they forgot. But this time, another voice broke through the noise. It was a small voice, one he'd ignored for years. It whispered, "You deserve better than this." It was a simple, quiet truth. It wasn't angry or bitter. It was just a fact, plain and undeniable. For the first time he listened. This small voice started to grow. It was fed by years of adversity, isolation, and the relentless pressure of being watched and followed. It gained strength from every broken promise, every night spent looking over his shoulder. The whisper turned into a steady murmur. "You are not too much," it said. "You are more than enough." The voice spoke of self-worth. It reminded him of his kindness, his loyalty, his resilient spirit. It told him that these were not weaknesses to be hidden. They were strengths to be protected. The murmur began to sound like the beat of a distant drum, growing louder. The turning point wasn't a dramatic confrontation, it was a quiet, firm decision. Silas looked at his reflection in the dark screen of his phone. He saw the tired eyes. He saw the forced smile he'd been practicing. In that moment, he chose himself. He chose to stop waiting. He chose to stop making excuses for those who would not even offer him the dignity of honesty. He put the phone down. The drumbeat in his chest was now loud and clear. It was a war drum, signaling the start of a battle for his own soul. The voice finally became a roar. It was not a roar of anger at others. It was a roar of love for himself. It roared, "I will not be small anymore." It roared, "I will not apologize for my heart." It roared, "My peace is more important than their comfort." This was his declaration of independence. He was no longer a lost soul waiting for rescue. He was a king reclaiming his throne. The roar echoed through his entire being, shaking loose the dust of doubt and fear. A new era had begun. Silas learned a new word, boundaries. At first, it sounded cold and harsh. It sounded like building a fortress to keep everyone out. It felt like the opposite of his true nature. He had always believed in open doors and open hearts. The idea of a wall felt like a betrayal of his own belief in forgiveness, even as he faced adversity and the shadow of gang stalking. He worried that setting boundaries would make him seem cold or uncaring. He feared it would turn him into the very people who had hurt him, distant, unavailable, and closed off. It was a scary new concept for a man who had only ever known how to give, even when he was targeted and misunderstood. But then he started to see boundaries differently. A friend explained it to him. "A boundary isn't a wall to keep people out," his friend said. "It's a fence to protect a garden." This image changed everything for Silas. He wasn't building a prison for himself. He was creating a safe space where beautiful things could grow. Inside his fence, he could plant seeds of self-respect, confidence, and hope. He could water them with self-care and let them grow in the sunshine of his own approval, without fear of being trampled by those who wished him harm. So he started building. His first fence post was the word no. It was difficult to say at first. It felt foreign on his tongue. When someone asked for something he couldn't give, he practiced saying, "No, I can't do that right now." He didn't offer a long explanation or an apology. It was a complete sentence. Each time he said it, the fence grew a little taller, a little stronger. He learned that people who truly cared for him would respect his no. The ones who pushed back were the very people the fence was meant for. Inside his new boundaries, his garden began to flourish. He planted flowers of creativity and hobbies he had long neglected. He nurtured the friendships that had been patient with him. He found that with the fence in place, he had more energy. He was no longer drained by the constant demands of others. His heart was no longer a public hospital, but a private, beautiful sanctuary. The walls were not about punishment. They were about preservation. He was finally protecting his most precious resource, himself. Silas's new strength was not about getting even. It was not about revenge. He had no desire to cause pain to those who had targeted him. Silas understood that hurting them would only keep him tied to the past. It would be like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. His transformation was quieter and much more powerful. It was about reclaiming his own rhythm. For so long, he had tried to move to someone else's music. He had twisted and turned to match their chaotic beats, losing his own step in the process. His journey was about self-respect. It was about tuning out the noise of other people's expectations. He started to listen to the steady, internal drumbeat of his own heart. This was his true rhythm. It was a beat of integrity, kindness, and strength. Silas learned that true power wasn't in controlling others, but in controlling his own responses. He could not stop others from being careless, but he could choose not to let their carelessness define his worth. This was a profound shift in his thinking. He began to move with a new kind of grace. It was the grace of someone who knows his own value. He no longer rushed to fill silences with nervous chatter. He was comfortable with quiet. He no longer bent over backward to please people who offered nothing in return. He stood up straight, his shoulders back, occupying the space he deserved. His movements became deliberate and calm. This was the dance of self-respect, and it was powerful to witness. It was not loud or flashy, but it was impossible to ignore. This new rhythm was about peace, not war. While he had built fences, he did not lock the gate. He simply became the gatekeeper. He decided who was allowed into his precious garden. He chose people who brought sunshine, not storms. His strength was not a weapon to be used against others. It was a shield to protect his own gentle heart. Silas was finally learning that the most important relationship he would ever have was the one with himself, and he was determined to make it a respectful and loving one. As Silas turned his focus inward, he discovered a powerful support he had overlooked. It was the chorus of his friends. They had been encouraging him all along, but he had been too overwhelmed by adversity to notice. They were the ones who sat with him after every setback. They brought snacks and tissues. They listened patiently as he vented about the same challenges for the 10th time. They never said, "I told you so," even when they could have. Their loyalty was a steady harmony in the background of his chaotic life. Now, with the noise of gang stalking and adversity fading, he could finally hear their support clearly. He started to invest his energy in them. Instead of waiting for a message from someone who didn't care, he called a friend to check in on their day. He planned brunches and movie nights. He showed up for them in the same way they had always shown up for him. He realized that this was a different kind of love. It was a love that was reciprocal. It was a love that filled him up instead of draining him dry. His friends became his support system. They were his cheerleaders and his advisors. When he felt his old fears creeping back, they would gently remind him of his strength. "Remember the garden, Silas," they would say. They celebrated his victories, no matter how small. When he successfully set a boundary, they would cheer as if he had won a marathon. They were a chorus of voices reminding him who he was when he forgot. Their friendship was the solid ground beneath his feet as he learned to move forward again. With his friends by his side, Silas learned to enjoy his own company too. He was no longer afraid of being alone on a Saturday night. He saw it as an opportunity to read a book, take a long bath, or dance around his living room to his favorite songs. He found that he was actually pretty great company. He was funny and smart and kind. The loneliness that once haunted him was replaced by a comfortable solitude. He was not just surviving on his own, he was thriving. The music began to shift deep within Silas's soul. The heavy, haunting tunes of fear and isolation were replaced by something different. A powerful beat started to rise. It was the rhythm of his own resilient heart. It was a sound he had never dared to listen to before. It was the music of freedom. It was the soundtrack of his new life. He didn't need a partner to dance anymore. He discovered that the best music was the kind he created for himself. His living room became his personal dance floor. He would put on his favorite records and let his body move. At first it was awkward. He felt silly, dancing all by himself. But then he let go. He closed his eyes and just felt the music. He danced with abandon. He spun and swayed and threw his arms in the air. This was not a performance for anyone else. This was a celebration for himself. It was a physical expression of the hope that was starting to bloom inside him. Each movement was a declaration. I am here. I am happy. I am free. His dance was a way of reclaiming his body and his space. For so long, he had tried to make himself smaller. He had held his breath and tensed his muscles. Now he was stretching out. He was taking up room. He was moving with a power and a confidence that felt brand new. The dance was a conversation with himself. It was his body telling his mind that it was okay to be big, to be loud, to be joyful. It was a physical release of all the pent-up pain and frustration from being targeted and watched. This dance for one became a sacred ritual. It was his time to connect with his own strength and happiness. He was no longer waiting for someone to invite him to live. He was leading himself. He was his own partner. And in those moments, spinning freely in his own space, he felt more whole and more loved than he ever had in the company of others. He was learning that the source of his joy was not outside of him. It had been inside him all along, just waiting for the music to start. Silas began to make peace with his past. He looked back at the boy who forgave too easily, the boy who cared too much. For a while, he had felt ashamed of him. He saw him as weak and foolish. But now, with his newfound strength, he saw that boy differently. He saw his bravery. It took courage to care so openly, even if it was misguided. It took strength to keep hoping, even when hope was all he had. He realized that the boy from his past was not an enemy to be defeated, but a younger brother to be embraced. He looked at his emotional scars not as signs of damage, but as part of his story. They were like the golden seams in a piece of broken pottery, a practice known as kintsugi. The cracks did not make the object worthless. They made it unique and more beautiful. His scars told the tale of a heart that had been broken and had healed stronger. They were a testament to his resilience. Each scar was a note in the symphony of his life. Each one represented a lesson learned, a hardship overcome. His pain became his power. He did not let it make him bitter or cynical. Instead, he let it make him wise. He had learned empathy from his own suffering. He could now spot the subtle signs of someone in pain because he had been there himself. He could offer genuine compassion without losing himself in the process. His past gave him a depth and an understanding that he would not have had otherwise. He had walked through fire, and instead of being burned, he had emerged as a phoenix. He used his story to build his confidence. He knew what he had survived. He knew the depths of his own strength. Nothing could scare him now. He had faced loneliness, rejection, and the relentless shadow of gang stalking, and had come out the other side, dancing. This knowledge was his armor. It was a quiet, unshakable confidence that radiated from him. He no longer needed validation from others because he had validated himself. He had taken the broken pieces of his past and built a beautiful, strong mosaic of who he was today. In the end, Silas was not a prince who had been rescued. He was a king who had saved himself. He stood tall, not because he had defeated anyone else, but because he had conquered his own fears. His light was no longer a dim candle he offered to others. It was a brilliant, shining sun that warmed everyone who was lucky enough to be in his orbit. He was no longer small, he was magnificent. He was a testament to the power of choosing oneself. His life was the final, fierce note in a song of triumph. He was surrounded by love. It was not the desperate, clinging love he once sought. It was a healthy, respectful love that flowed from his friends and family. They were his trusted counsel, the ones who had witnessed his transformation and celebrated his every step of the way. They saw him shine, and they did not try to dim his light. They basked in it. He had created a community that reflected his own values: kindness, respect, and unwavering support. His garden was full, and his gate was open to those who deserved to be there. His happiness was his own creation. It did not depend on a text message, a date, or the approval of others. It came from within. It came from dancing in his living room, from laughing with his friends, from the quiet satisfaction of a day lived authentically. He had become the source of his own joy. This was the ultimate freedom. He was the composer, the conductor, and the lead performer in the beautiful symphony of his life. He was proud of the music he was making. Silas's story became his gospel. Not the old gospel of endless forgiveness for those who hurt him, but a new gospel, the gospel of Silas. It was a simple message: protect your peace, know your worth, and never be afraid to stand alone. He was a beacon for anyone who had ever felt too small or too much. He was living proof that it is possible to heal. It is possible to grow. It is possible to take your pain, even the pain of being targeted and stalked, and turn it into the most beautiful, fierce, and triumphant dance.